More often than not, the money we spend on projects, goods, and services is not our own. As project leaders and procurement professionals, we are engaged by the businesses to create strategies, run projects, and demonstrate fiscal and fiduciary responsibility, usually for things paid for by someone else's budget. Very rarely will we own the budget. So how do we identify the key players? What are their motivations? How do we gain an understanding of their positioning? How do we engage and communicate with them? And how do we influence and manage them? Given we are spending other people's money, it is important we effectively engage key stakeholders so there is alignment between what we are doing and their business needs. Stakeholder engagement is the proactive management and involvement of internal business partners, stakeholders, and constituents. It lays the groundwork for successful development, management, and implementation of projects, category strategies, the ongoing supplier management effort, and the agreement of an operating model for ongoing accountability. Stakeholder engagement identifies and helps assess stakeholders on two levels: their support for what you're trying to do and their level of influence within the organization. By understanding these two key elements, you can determine the best and most effective way to engage your stakeholders. By understanding individuals' motives and positions, you can influence in a positive way the process of change and minimize and problem solve the issues that are traditionally a barrier to change. So let's break down the key elements of the stakeholder engagement matrix. The horizontal axis addresses the level of support from a stakeholder being unaware of your project all the way to being a champion. Let's take a minute to help define what each level of support means. Unaware represents those stakeholders who you believe do not, for the most part, have an understanding of your project or the work you are doing. Unconvinced represents those stakeholders that express their concerns and demonstrate their resistance either through open, active engagement or silent disagreement. On the fence represents those stakeholders who are seeking a greater understanding of the compelling business case, i.e. facts and data, which would increase their comfort level to enable them to move their level of support. Failure to effectively engage these stakeholders with a compelling business case could result in their movement into the unconvinced column. Aligned represents stakeholders that demonstrate their willingness to provide support. While not necessarily ready to engage as champion, they do not demonstrate either active or passive resistance. Champion represents those stakeholders who openly demonstrate support and commitment. Champions are willing to engage and play an active role with those stakeholders that are either unconvinced or on the fence to help obtain their commitment. The vertical axis represents the stakeholders' level of influence across the company. Let's look at what each level of influence means. Self represents stakeholders who have a very limited level of influence that does not go beyond themselves. They can only influence their own views, own level of engagement, and own level of support. Function represents stakeholders with the ability to influence positioning and decisions with a specific function. They do not have the ability to influence beyond their own function. Business represents stakeholders with the ability to influence positioning and decisions across the business unit level in the organization. Company represents stakeholders who can set direction, policy, and influence decisions across the whole of the corporation. We start this process by generating a list of our key stakeholders. When completing this listing, each stakeholder is numbered, starting with the number 1. Assigning numbers helps to maintain a level of confidentiality and facilitates the plotting of stakeholders on the stakeholder engagement matrix. Once we have completed our listing, the next step is to plot each stakeholder on the stakeholder engagement matrix based on their level of support and their level of influence. When you've plotted all the stakeholders, review the matrix and ask yourself the question, so what? What is the matrix telling you? What insights can be gained? Are there clusters of support? Are there clusters of resistance? What is the best way to engage specific stakeholders or stakeholder groups? Which stakeholders do I need to influence and gain their support? Based on a stakeholder's positioning, it is important to determine the appropriate engagement approach and messages that need to be communicated. Messaging and engagement plans will differ significantly depending on where the stakeholder sits on your matrix. The ability to understand and influence a key stakeholder's position could mean the difference between a successful outcome and failure. The next step is to determine which stakeholders we need to influence and what support level is needed from them. It is important to note that while not all stakeholders will necessarily need to change their positioning, For those that are critical to the success of your project, strategy, and implementation, your engagement plan will be a key driver. Where necessary, seek the support of champions. This becomes more important depending on the level of influence of either unconvinced or on-the-fence stakeholders. Based on a stakeholder's positioning, the next step is to determine and tailor the specific approach and message to ensure successful engagement. For example, the message to the unaware stakeholder is focused on data and information to help create understanding and awareness. With unconvinced and/or on-the-fence stakeholders, the message focuses on understanding the reasons for their concerns and finding ways to address them. The engagement and focus with aligned stakeholders and champions is about providing information that solidifies their support along with engaging their help and approaching other stakeholders. A well-executed engagement and communications plan is a key requirement to achieve successful stakeholder engagement and set the stage for delivering a compelling business case, not only for the strategy, but for the implementation and potential changes required. The stakeholder engagement tool is designed to ensure the proactive influencing and management of stakeholders across the organization who are imperative to the success of the project or strategy.